"Put that back where it belongs, or I swear I'll call the police and never forgive you." I didn't shout it. I hissed it into the heavy, wet air of late October. Too late for heat like this. Too late for the kind of afternoon that sticks to your skin and slows your thinking, because the moment I saw the leather suitcase arc from her hands and slice the lake, the rest of me forgot how to breathe. It was 15 inches the afternoon. I know because I had just poured my tea and glanced at the old kitchen clock, the one that used to tick in my mother's house, steady as prayer beads. Lake Crestwood lay in front of my porch like a sheet of black glass. The willow at the far bend trembled with dragonflies. Inside, the house where I raised my boy, my only one, Marcus held that special kind of silence a home learns after a funeral. 6 months, and the quiet still felt like a person standing behind me, not speaking. Then Serena's silver sedan appeared on the dirt road, kicking up a tail of dust. Serena, my daughter-in-law, my son's widow. She came fast, too fast for that road Marcus and I used to walk at sunset when fireflies nested in the reeds. The engine roared like it wanted out of the car. She braked so hard the tires screamed. Dust rolled, coughed, settled on my steps. I dropped my teacup. It shattered. I didn't even look down. She was wearing the gray dress Marcus gave her for their anniversary. I knew the line of it. I helped him choose it. It clung to her now, darker with sweat. Her hair was coming loose, her face raw and red, as if she'd either been crying or forcing herself not to. She wrenched the trunk open with a violence that made the lid bounce, then slammed both hands around the handle of the brown leather suitcase I had given her the day they married. "So, you can carry your dreams everywhere," I had told her. Foolish. Naive. She could barely lift it. I saw the way her arms shook, the way her shoulders braced like she was dragging a body across a floor. "Serena!" I called from the porch. If she heard me, she pretended she didn't. The lake answered with one small wind that rippled the glass. She staggered to the water's edge and swung once, twice. On the third swing, she let the suitcase fly. It hit hard, an ugly, wet sound, and a flock of birds leapt from the reeds like a torn blanket. For a moment it floated, dimpled and bobbing, as if it needed a second to understand what was expected of it. Then it began to sink. Serena stood and watched, just watched. Then she ran. She sprinted back to the car like the devil was chasing her, slammed her door, and tore down the road, throwing up a sheet of dust that rolled over me and broke apart on the porch like surf. I stood still for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Everything inside me that was mother, that was nurse and neighbor and woman and habit, turned and ran before the rest of me could argue. My legs carried me down the steps, across the brittle lawn, over the gritty road. The lake smell muck and sun-warmed algae rose up and met me. I hit the shore and waded in without thinking. The water was colder than a lie. Mud sucked at my sandals until one gave up and stayed. I pushed forward anyway, dress dragging like a net around my knees. I reached it only a corner now, a dark, drowning rectangle. I grabbed the strap. The leather felt slick, fat with water and something else. The weight of it punched my shoulder down. I hauled. My arms burned the way they did when Marcus was small and fell asleep in the car and I wouldn't wake him. I hauled again. It moved grudgingly and came up with a sound like a torn lung. I got it onto the sand and collapsed next to it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely find the zipper. It was stuck, teeth gummed by lake water and mud. "Come on," I told it, as if it were a person who might listen. "Come on, come on." I wedged my fingernails under the tab and yanked. The zipper tore free with a small metallic cry. Before I lifted the lid, I heard it. A sound so faint I thought I had imagined it. A muffled mewling from somewhere inside the dark. My blood thinned. My breath left. "Please, God," I said quiet, "the way people speak in church when they don't want to be heard and need to be, please don't let it be what I'm thinking." I opened the suitcase. The world stopped. There, wrapped in a soaked blue blanket, lay a baby. A tiny new, still thing. Lips bruised purple, skin the color of wax. A piece of string tied tight around what should have been clamped and clean. His eyelids were 2 pale shells. He wasn't moving. For a moment I forgot that I had a body. Then my hands remembered themselves and reached in, shaking with a terror I hadn't felt even on the day they lowered my son into the ground. He was so lighter than my grief, lighter than the breath I couldn't find. Cold, slippery, real. I lifted him and pressed his face against my cheek, listening for a sound, any sound, willing warmth into him with a heat my skin didn't have. Nothing. I tilted his head. I put my ear to his chest. The lake lapped at the sand behind us like somebody whispering a secret. The willow creaked. Somewhere a crow laughed. I closed my eyes and tried again. Something fluttered against my ear, so thin I could have missed it, a thread of life snagging. "Hold on," I told him, and my voice didn't sound like mine. "Hold on for me. Just one more minute." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The only answer was the weight of him in my arms and the clock in my head that had just begun to scream. Before that day turned into a nightmare, it was just another quiet October afternoon, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and rain that never came. The kind where loneliness sat beside me like an old friend who refused to leave. I had woken early that morning, as I always did, out of habit more than need. The house had stopped feeling like home after Marcus died. It had turned into a museum of his absence, his laughter still echoing in the walls, his boots still by the door. I dusted the shelves, made tea, pretended there was a reason to keep the windows open even though the air outside was heavy and wet. I told myself that if I listened closely enough, I might still hear his car on the gravel road, that low, familiar rumble that used to make my heart lift. 6 months since the accident, and the world had gone on like nothing had happened. The neighbors still mowed their lawns, the mail still came, the seasons changed. Only I stayed the same, a widow of both husband and son, living in a house that felt too large, too hollow, too quiet. The morning light slid across the living room, catching on dust motes and old picture frames. Marcus was everywhere, his graduation photo, his wedding picture, the crooked shelf he had built for me that I never fixed because I couldn't bear to change a thing he touched. Serena's smile in those photos had always bothered me. It wasn't cold, not exactly just too perfect, too practiced. Even when she held Marcus's arm, her eyes never softened. They were calculating, like she was already measuring what she stood to gain. I'd tried to love her, truly I had. When Marcus brought her home for the first time, I cooked roast chicken, her favorite. I even gave her the leather suitcase that had once been mine, saying, "Every woman needs something of her own when she begins a journey." She thanked me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thought grief would make us closer after Marcus died. I thought shared loss might build some bridge between us. But Serena stopped visiting after the funeral. She came once. To collect Marcus's belongings, she said it was too painful to come again. I watched her pack his shirts like they were things she'd borrowed and was returning out of obligation. Then she left, and I didn't see her again. Until that day. That morning, the sun felt too bright, the air too still. I remember setting the table for one. The way the chair across from me seemed to accuse me of something of still being alive, perhaps. I remember the taste of the tea, slightly bitter, because I'd forgotten to stir in the sugar. I remember the clock ticking too loudly, the sound of the wind chime outside ringing with no wind at all. And then there was the road, the narrow strip of dirt and gravel that wound down from the main highway toward the lake. I could see it clearly from my porch. Marcus and I had walked that road 1,000 times. He was 10 when he first pointed out the shimmer of Lake Crestwood through the trees. "It looks like glass, Mama," he said, "like God dropped a mirror." I told him the lake held secrets, that it remembered everything dropped into it, words, stones, promises. He laughed then. I didn't. I suppose that's why I noticed the car so quickly. I knew that sound, the crunch of tires, the echo of the engine as it rolled downhill. But this one was faster, frantic. I saw the cloud of dust before I saw the silver sedan. It came tearing down the path like something wild, like someone running from ghosts. At first I thought it couldn't be Serena. She never drove like that. She was always composed, immaculate, a woman who measured every step, every smile. But when I saw her hair, that chestnut color Marcus loved, and the curve of her shoulders, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I stood on the porch, clutching the railing, the ceramic cup still warm in my hand. I could hear the faint buzz of insects, the creak of the boards beneath my feet, the far-off ripple of the lake. Then she slammed the brakes. The tires screamed. My teacup slipped. It shattered, porcelain shards scattering like pieces of the day breaking apart. Serena got out of the car, eyes wild, hands trembling. There was no grace in her anymore, only panic. She moved fast, almost tripping as she rushed to the trunk. My heart began to race, though I couldn't explain why. I told myself maybe she was drunk, maybe she'd lost control, maybe grief had finally caught up to her. But deep down, I knew it wasn't grief that made people move like that. It was fear, guilt, desperation. I remember whispering, "Please, God, don't let it be her," even as I knew it was. And when she lifted that suitcase, the one I had given her with my blessing, I felt a chill that didn't belong in such hot air. A mother knows when something sacred is being broken. And in that moment, I knew, without a word or sound, that whatever was inside that suitcase was about to change my life forever. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, but the heat still clung to everything sticky, heavy, relentless. The air smelled like rain that would never fall, and the light turned the water of Lake Crestwood into a mirror too bright to look at for long. I remember that reflection clearly, because I saw her in it first, a figure moving too fast, bending, lifting, trembling. It was Serena. Her silver sedan was still idling, the engine growling low, like it resented being left alone. Dust swirled around her as she struggled with the suitcase. For a few seconds I could hear nothing but that muffled hum, the whine of insects, the distant croak of frogs hidden in the reeds. Then her voice broke the silence, not words, just a strained, guttural sound, half sob, half grunt, as she dragged the heavy case from the trunk. I had never seen her like that. The woman I remembered from dinner tables and polite visits was always neat, poised, careful with her tone and her posture. But this Serena looked wild. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, her dress clung to her back, her movements were jerky, desperate. I watched her look around first toward the trees, then toward the road, her head darting like a frightened animal's. When her eyes brushed the house, I froze. I couldn't tell if she saw me or if she was too lost in whatever storm had swallowed her. Then, gripping the suitcase with both hands, she staggered toward the lake. "Serena!" I called again, louder this time. My voice cracked against the stillness, but she didn't stop. She didn't even turn her head. She kept walking, her shoes sinking slightly into the damp soil near the edge. Each step looked heavier than the one before, as though the weight she carried wasn't just in her arms, it was inside her, crushing her. The water was calm, unnervingly calm. When she reached the edge, she paused for a moment. I saw her shoulders shake. Then she swung the suitcase once, twice, and on the third swing, she hurled it. The sound it made wasn't a splash. It was a thud, a deep, ugly thud, like a body hitting wet earth. A flock of blackbirds shot up from the reeds, their wings slicing the air. The suitcase bobbed on the surface for a moment, defying gravity, then tilted and began to sink. The ripples spread out in circles that caught the light and shimmered gold before fading into the dark. For a heartbeat, Serena stood there staring at the water, motionless. The wind had died. Even the cicadas stopped their song. She lifted one hand to her mouth, as if to stifle a cry, then turned and ran stumbling, almost falling, sprinting back to the car. She slammed the door, revved the engine, and tore down the road, her tires screaming, her taillights swallowed by the dust. Then there was only silence again. Dust and silence. I didn't move. My mind refused to catch up with what my eyes had just seen. A suitcase in the lake, a woman fleeing like a criminal, my daughter-in-law Marcus's wife throwing away something so heavy, so deliberate. I should have gone inside, I should have called someone, but I didn't. My body decided before my mind did. I was already running. The ground burned through the thin soles of my sandals. The sharp stones cut into my feet. I could taste the dust in my throat as I gasped for breath. The lake seemed farther away than it had ever been, though it was barely 100 yards. Each step sounded like thunder in my ears. Every second stretched, warped, slowed. By the time I reached the water's edge, my lungs were on fire and my heart felt too large for my chest. There it was, the suitcase, half sunk, rocking gently in the water, as if mocking me. "Dear God," I whispered, though I didn't know what I was praying for. That it was empty? That I was wrong? That whatever was inside wasn't what I feared? The leather had darkened, heavy with water. I waded in, my dress clinging to my legs, the cold biting into my skin. The mud sucked greedily at my feet, trying to pull me down. The smell of algae and rot hit me like a wall. I stretched my arms out and caught one of the straps. It slipped once, twice, before I got a grip. The suitcase felt alive, moving slightly, resisting. My muscles screamed as I pulled, water splashing up into my face, blinding me for a moment. It took everything I had to drag it to shore. My knees hit the wet sand. My fingers fumbled at the latch. It was slick, hard to grasp. The sound of my own breathing was the only thing I could hear now, ragged, uneven, desperate. I hesitated for half a second, afraid of what waited inside. And then it came, the sound. A faint, muffled cry. It was small, almost inaudible, but it cut through me like lightning. My stomach dropped. Every thought vanished, leaving only one truth pulsing in my veins. There was something alive in there. "No," I whispered. "Please, no." My hands shook so badly I could barely open the zipper. It caught halfway, jammed with sand and mud. I yanked harder, tearing my nails, muttering prayers I hadn't said since Marcus was a child. The zipper gave way with a metallic shriek. I pulled the lid open and my world ended. A tiny, pale face. Blue blanket. Purple lips. A baby. For a moment, everything went silent again. Even the lake seemed to stop moving. My fingers touched his cheek. It was cold, clammy. I lifted him with both hands. He weighed almost nothing, lighter than a loaf of bread, lighter than my own heart. I pressed his little chest to my ear. Silence. I tilted my head, pressed again. Nothing. Then, so faint I could have imagined it a sigh. A whisper of air, barely there. But it was enough. "He's breathing," I gasped. "Oh my God, he's breathing." I held him closer, running toward the house with a speed I didn't know my body still possessed. The road blurred beneath my feet, the wind tore at my hair, and my heart beat in time with the tiny life trembling against my chest. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. This child, this fragile miracle, had been meant to die. And I was the only one left to stop it. By the time I reached the porch, I was gasping so hard that each breath scraped my throat raw. My feet left a trail of mud and blood on the wooden steps, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the tiny, freezing body in my arms. His skin was so pale it frightened me. It reminded me of wax, of something that belonged in a candlelight vigil, not in the arms of the living. I kicked the door open with my shoulder and stumbled into the kitchen. The clock on the wall said 5:28. Only 13 minutes had passed since I first saw Serena's car, but it felt like a lifetime. I laid the baby on the counter, my hands trembling so badly I could barely think. His lips were purple, his eyelids didn't move. The small, damp blanket clung to his skin like seaweed. "Come on, sweetheart," I whispered, though I didn't even know if he could hear me. "Please, don't you leave me now." The phone hung on the wall by the refrigerator, old, yellowed, the same one Marcus used to call from college. I grabbed it and punched the numbers with my shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? The woman's voice on the other end was calm, practiced. "There's a baby." I couldn't breathe. I forced the words out. "I found a baby. In a lake. He's not breathing right. He's cold. Please. Please. Send help." "Ma'am, calm down," she said gently. "Tell me your address." 43 Cedar Row, Lake Crestwood, please hurry. "Is the baby breathing?" I don't know. I think so. Just barely." "Place him on a flat surface and make sure his head is supported. Dry him gently. Wrap him in something warm." Her voice was steady, anchoring me in that storm of panic. I followed her instructions without thinking. I swept the table clear with one motion. Plates crashed, glass shattered, tea spread across the floor like spilled blood. I didn't care. I set the baby down carefully and ran to grab towels from the bathroom. The mirror in the hallway caught a glimpse of me as I passed a wet, wild-haired ghost with terror in her eyes. I didn't recognize her. I returned to the table, drying the baby with trembling hands, rubbing gently to warm his cold skin. Every few seconds, I paused to listen for breath, for any sign of life. "Come on, sweetheart, stay with me, please." When the blanket came off, I saw the umbilical cord still attached, tied with a rough piece of string. Whoever brought this child into the world did it in secret. No doctor, no hospital, no care. It hit me then like a slap. Serena, my daughter-in-law, Marcus's wife. She'd been pregnant, and I had never known. "Oh God," I whispered, the world tilting around me. "What have you done?" A small sound answered a faint whimper, fragile as a breath through paper. I froze. The baby's chest rose, barely perceptible, a shudder of life. "Yes," I said, almost laughing through tears. "Yes, that's it, you fight. You fight, little one." The sirens came faint, at first distant, echoing through the trees, then closer, louder, until red and white lights painted the walls of my kitchen. I ran to the door, still clutching the baby, as two paramedics rushed inside. The older one, with a gray beard, moved fast but gentle. The younger woman, her ponytail tight, her eyes sharp, took the child from me like she'd done this 100 times but never without care. "What happened?" she asked. I saw someone throw a suitcase into the lake," I stammered. She left. It was my daughter-in-law. I pulled it out. He was inside." The woman's eyes flicked toward me. Something unreadable flashed across her face. Not disbelief. Not pity. Something closer to sorrow. "He's alive," she said softly. "Weak but alive. We need to move now." They placed the baby on a tiny stretcher, wires and masks appearing like magic in their hands. I followed them out, half running, half falling. The sky had begun to bruise into dusk. The lake behind me glowed silver and silent, as if it hadn't just been the scene of something monstrous. "Are you coming with us?" the older paramedic asked, already opening the ambulance door. "Yes," I said without thinking. "Yes, I have to." Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and rubber. Machines beeped softly. The young paramedic pressed a stethoscope to the baby's chest, her expression unreadable. "Severe hypothermia," she murmured. "Possible water aspiration." I gripped the metal rail beside me. "Will he live?" She didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened. "We'll do everything we can." As the ambulance lurched forward, the siren wailed through the trees. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, staring at the small bundle of life lying under the harsh fluorescent lights. The baby's chest moved ever so slightly, a fragile rhythm defying death itself. "Who did this to you?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "What kind of monster could throw you away?" The paramedic looked up from her work, her eyes meeting mine. "Did you see who it was?" she asked. I hesitated. The truth clung to my tongue like ash. Serena Marcus's wife, the woman who had stood by his coffin, sobbing as though her heart had broken. I saw her face again in my mind, twisted with something I didn't understand. Guilt, rage, fear. "Yes," I said finally, my throat dry. "I saw her. It was Serena." The paramedic didn't respond. She just nodded, the faintest movement, and returned to her work. The city lights began to rise ahead, smudged by dusk. My reflection in the ambulance window looked older than I remembered, more haunted. And though the baby's breaths remained faint, they were steady proof of life, proof of something I couldn't yet name. As the siren wailed and the world blurred outside, one thought pulsed in my mind over and over. This wasn't an accident. This was a secret, and I was now part of it. The ambulance tore through the evening like a blade through silk. Red and white lights flared against the passing trees, flashing across my reflection in the window pale, streaked with lake water and fear. I could hear the rhythmic hiss of oxygen, the rapid instructions between the two paramedics, the fragile, uneven sound of a baby's breath that seemed to command the air itself to stay still. City General Hospital rose ahead like a fortress of glass and light. I had been there before years ago when Marcus broke his wrist playing baseball. That day, I'd held his hand and told him everything would be fine. Now, I clutched the metal rail of the stretcher as if my grip alone could keep this tiny stranger, this almost son, tethered to life. The doors burst open. "We've got a newborn male, found submerged, hypothermic, irregular respiration," the younger paramedic shouted as they wheeled him down the corridor. Voices layered over each other. Doctors barking orders, nurses moving fast, the squeak of shoes against tile. A woman in green scrubs cut the air beside me, holding a small mask and clear tubing. "Ma'am, you need to wait here," someone said, a hand on my arm. The voice was kind but firm. "They'll take care of him." "I can't leave him," I protested. My voice sounded foreign, thin. He's just a baby." "We know," she said. "You've done your part. Let us do ours." They disappeared through a set of double doors, and suddenly I was left in the hallway, drenched, shaking, surrounded by strangers. The scent of antiseptic and bleach filled my nose, sharp and clean and cruel. A nurse pressed a blanket around my shoulders. I hadn't realized I was still soaked. I clutched the fabric, but it did nothing to stop the tremors running through me. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. The clock on the wall didn't seem to move, and every sound, the rolling of gurneys, the distant buzz of intercom announcements faded to a blur. I was back at Marcus's funeral for a moment, the same sterile smell of flowers and grief. He had looked so peaceful in that coffin, too peaceful for a man who died screaming inside a twisted car. A voice broke through my memory. "Ma'am? Mrs. Johnson?" I looked up. The nurse was older than most, with silver streaks in her hair and soft lines around her eyes. Her badge read Rhonda Banks, RN. She smiled, not the empty professional kind, but one that said she'd seen worse and still believed in miracles. "I'm Rhonda," she said. "You're the one who found the baby?" I nodded. My throat felt tight. "You saved his life," she said simply. Her words should have comforted me, but instead they cracked something open. I began to cry, not loud, not messy, just quiet tears that wouldn't stop. Rhonda sat beside me on the bench without asking, her hand resting lightly on my arm until the shaking eased. "They're stabilizing him now," she said after a moment. "He's in the neonatal ICU. It's too early to say much, but he's fighting. Will he live?" The question came out in a whisper. She hesitated, then met my eyes. "He's stronger than he looks. That's all I can tell you." A new sound broke the air, the firm click of polished shoes on tile. 2 police officers approached a woman with her hair pulled into a severe bun and a younger man carrying a notepad. The woman's eyes were sharp, intelligent. She looked at me like she was already trying to piece me together. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, flipping open her badge. "Detective Nia Thompson, Lake County Police. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "Now," I asked, my voice trembling. He's still—" "I know," she said gently, though her tone carried steel beneath it. "But time is important." Rhonda squeezed my shoulder before stepping back. I nodded, letting the detective guide me to a quiet corner of the waiting area. The younger officer hovered close, scribbling in his notebook. "Start from the beginning," Nia said. "Tell me exactly what you saw." And so I did. I told her about the tea, the clock, the car speeding down the dirt road. About Serena, my daughter-in-law. About the suitcase, the lake, the desperate run, the sound from inside. My voice cracked when I said the word baby. When I finished, Nia didn't speak right away. She just studied me, her dark eyes unblinking. Finally she said, "And you're sure it was your daughter-in-law?" "Yes," I said. "I know what I saw." "What time exactly?" 5:15, maybe a few minutes after. "And no one else was around?" "No, just her. And me." Nia nodded, then glanced at her partner. "We'll need you to come in tomorrow for a formal statement. For now, please don't contact your daughter-in-law. Understood?" "Understood," I whispered. She gave me a business card, Nia Thompson, Homicide Division. The word homicide made my stomach turn. When they left, the silence returned. Heavier this time. Rhonda reappeared with a cup of hot tea. I stared at the steam curling upward like smoke from a dying candle. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "It doesn't feel like it," I murmured. "It feels like I opened a door I can't close." Rhonda didn't argue. She just nodded, like she understood more than she was allowed to say. 2 hours later, a young doctor approached. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hands that smelled faintly of antiseptic. "Mrs. Johnson?" "Yes?" "The baby's stable for now," he said. "He suffered from severe hypothermia and water aspiration, but he's breathing on his own. The next 48 hours will be critical." My knees nearly gave out with relief. "Can I see him?" "Not yet," he said. "Soon. He's very fragile." He started to leave, then hesitated. "You said you found him in the lake?" "Yes." "And you're certain the person you saw was your daughter-in-law?" I nodded again. Completely certain. He looked at me for a moment longer, as if weighing whether to believe me. Then he simply said, "You saved a life today, Mrs. Johnson," and walked away. But his words didn't ease the cold inside me. I sat in that hospital hallway long after the doctor was gone, clutching Rhonda's blanket and staring at the floor. Because no matter how much I wanted to believe I had saved a life, all I could think about was the woman I had seen standing at the lake, the woman who used to call me Mom. And for the first time, I realized something far worse than grief had taken root inside my family. Morning came too soon, washing the hospital in sterile light that made everything look more fragile than it really was. I hadn't slept. My body ached from exhaustion, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the suitcase sinking, heard the faint cry from inside, smelled the lake water clinging to the baby's skin. I was still sitting in the same chair when Detective Nia Thompson returned. She moved with the kind of calm that made other people nervous, no wasted gestures, no unnecessary words. She held a folder in one hand, a coffee cup in the other. "Mrs. Johnson," she greeted, her voice polite but sharp enough to cut glass. "Thank you for staying. We just need to go over a few details." She led me to a small consultation room, a bare space with a table, 2 chairs, and a buzzing fluorescent light that made the air feel colder. I sat down, hands folded in my lap, trying to look composed, but my knees were trembling under the table. Nia flipped open her folder. "Let's start from the beginning again," she said. "You were at home on the porch around 5:15 in the afternoon?" "Yes." "You saw your daughter-in-law, Serena Harris Johnson, drive up to the lake?" "I did." "Was she alone?" "Yes." "How far away were you?" "Maybe 100 yards." "And what did you see her do exactly?" I took a breath. She stopped near the edge, opened her trunk, took out a suitcase, the one I gave her as a wedding gift, and threw it into the lake. Then she drove off. Nia didn't react. Her pen moved smoothly over the notepad. "You're sure it was her?" "I'm sure." "Could anyone else have been wearing similar clothes or driving a similar car?" I frowned. "Her car is a silver sedan. Same model, same license plate." Nia nodded slightly, still writing. "We found Serena's vehicle, Mrs. Johnson, but it was in a supermarket parking lot 20 miles away, time-stamped by security footage at 5:20 p.m. I stared at her, the words not registering. "That's impossible." "I thought so too," she said, meeting my eyes. "But the footage is clear. The car was parked at that location 10 minutes after you said she threw the suitcase. That's why I need you to think very carefully. Could it have been someone else?" My mouth went dry. "No. It was her. I know what I saw." "People in shock sometimes misinterpret details," Nia said gently. "It's not uncommon, especially in moments of high stress." I wasn't hallucinating. I snapped before I could stop myself. The words came out harsher than intended. "I saw her, Detective. I saw her throw that suitcase into the lake with my own eyes." Nia's expression didn't change. She simply took a sip of her coffee and said, "All right, tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law." That question hit harder than I expected. I looked down at my hands. "It was strained," I admitted. "We were never close. Serena and I didn't agree on much." "Why not?" "She was difficult to read. Polite but distant. I always felt like she wanted Marcus for his success more than for who he was." "And how did you feel about her after your son's death?" I hesitated. The walls of the room seemed to close in a little. "I don't know," I said finally. "It's hard to separate grief from anger. Marcus died driving home from dinner with her. She survived with barely a scratch." Nia's pen paused mid-stroke. "Do you believe she was involved in your son's accident?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. For months I'd asked myself the same question in silence. The car had skidded off the road on a clear night. No rain, no ice. Marcus was a careful driver. It had never made sense. "I can't prove anything," I said quietly. But I never stopped wondering. Nia leaned back, folding her arms. "And now you're certain she tried to kill a baby?" "Yes. The baby you found has no identification, no record of birth, no known parents. Do you realize what that means?" "That she had him in secret," I whispered. "That she didn't want anyone to know." The detective's gaze softened just a fraction. "Mrs. Johnson, I don't want to doubt you, but the timeline doesn't fit, and until we locate Serena, we can't confirm anything. Right now, all we have is your statement." My throat tightened. "You think I made it up?" "I think grief does strange things to people," she said carefully. "You lost your son recently. You've been alone. Sometimes our minds create patterns to make sense of pain." I felt heat rise in my face. You think I imagined a woman throwing a suitcase into a lake? You think I hallucinated pulling a half-dead child out of the water? I think, Nia said evenly, that we have to consider every possibility. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the silence. Finally, she closed her folder. The baby's being tested for DNA. If there's a match to anyone in your family, we'll know soon. Until then, don't leave town, and please don't try to contact Serena. She stood ready to go, but I couldn't stay silent. Detective, I said softly, if you think I'm crazy, just say it. She met my eyes. I think you're a mother who's been through hell, but I also think truth and grief can look almost identical when you're standing too close. When she left, I sat alone, the cold from the chair seeping into my bones. Through the small window in the door, I could see the hallway nurses moving, monitors beeping, the normal rhythm of life continuing as if none of this had happened. But for me, everything had shifted. The ground under my feet no longer felt solid. The detective's words echoed in my mind, twisting around the images I couldn't unsee. What if I was wrong? What if it hadn't been Serena at all? What if my grief had built a ghost out of guilt and shadows? I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my heart hammer beneath it. No, I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't crazy. There was a reason that Suitcase had felt so heavy. There was a reason she'd vanished. And if no one else believed me, I would find the truth myself. That night, I stayed in the hospital, even though they told me I could go home. The idea of stepping back into that empty house, Marcus's pictures, staring down at me from every wall, the quiet pressing against my chest like a weight, was unbearable. So I sat in the waiting room, wrapped in the same blanket Rhonda had given me hours earlier, watching the rain streak across the windows like veins on glass. The hospital at night is its own world. The corridors hum softly, the air smells of disinfectant and stale coffee, and the people who move through it walk as if afraid to disturb the fragile thread that ties life to the living. Every once in a while, I'd hear a door creak open, a nurse's shoes squeak against tile, the distant cry of a newborn. That last sound, so thin and desperate, made my heart ache in a way I couldn't explain. Somewhere in this building, another baby was breathing, crying, demanding the world notice him. Mine, no, not mine, but the one I had pulled from the lake lay silent, fighting for every breath. At around 3 a.m, the rain stopped. The world outside looked washed clean, but the ache inside me only deepened. I thought of Marcus then, as I often did when the world went quiet. He'd been born in this same hospital 34 years ago. I remembered the way he'd wrapped his tiny fingers around mine for the first time, his little hand impossibly strong. I remembered whispering to him, "You're safe now, Mama's here." I had whispered almost the same words to that baby on my kitchen table hours earlier. The automatic doors hissed open. I looked up to see a familiar figure step inside the worn black coat, the silver hair, Pastor David Price. He'd been at Marcus's funeral. His deep, steady voice, the only thing that had kept me from collapsing beside the grave. "I heard what happened," he said softly, taking off his hat as he approached. "One of the nurses from our church called." I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "It feels like a bad dream that won't end." He sat beside me, folding his hands on his knees. For a long while he didn't say anything. The silence between us was comfortable, like a pause between old friends. Finally, he said, "God puts trials in our path, Estelle. Not because he's cruel, but because he believes we're strong enough to walk through them." "This doesn't feel like a trial," I said quietly. "It feels like punishment." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." We sat that way for another hour. No sermons, no promises, just presence. He prayed softly at one point, his words blending with the rhythmic beeping of a monitor down the hall. I didn't join in, but I didn't stop him either. His prayer was gentle, asking for light where there was darkness, for courage where there was fear. I hadn't prayed since Marcus's funeral. That night, I found myself whispering one of my own, not for me, but for the tiny boy lying behind glass and machines. When dawn finally arrived, I hadn't noticed until I felt the warmth of it on my hands. The light filtering through the blinds turned everything pale gold, as if the world had decided to forgive itself for what it had done. But I knew nothing had been forgiven. Not yet. Rhonda appeared again, a soft smile creasing her tired face. She carried 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for me. You haven't slept, she said, handing me the cup. I couldn't. He's still stable, she said before I could ask. His body temperature's up. He's breathing on his own now, though still weak. I felt my throat tighten. Can I see him? She hesitated. Not yet, but soon. They just want to keep him under observation for another few hours. I nodded. The words soon felt like a rope I could hold on to. After Rhonda left, I sat there watching the sun climb higher. The world outside was waking up, cars honking, people rushing to work, the ordinary rhythm of life returning as if the night had never happened. But my life had shifted completely. I knew that once I saw that child again, nothing would ever be the same. A thought crept in, quiet but persistent. If he survives, he'll need someone. Someone who cares. Someone who won't give up on him. And then, just as quickly, another voice, cold, logical, answered, He's not yours, Estelle. He never was. He belongs to whoever brought him into this world. But I couldn't silence the memory of Serena's face as she hurled that suitcase into the lake. Her trembling hands, the wild look in her eyes. If she could do that once, she could do it again. And if no one found her, that baby would never be safe. My coffee had gone cold when Detective Nia Thompson reappeared, the same folder tucked under her arm. She looked as though she hadn't slept either. Mrs. Johnson, she said, her tone softer this time. The lab processed the baby's DNA. My heart stopped. And? There's a partial match to you. She paused, letting the words sink in. He's your biological grandson. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The air thickened, my ears rang. My, what? Marcus's son, she said gently. We're certain. The words landed like stones. Marcus's son. Serena's baby. The baby she had tried to drown. My knees gave way, and I sat down hard. Pastor David caught my arm, steadying me. I stared at the detective, the world narrowing to the sound of my heartbeat. He has Marcus's blood, I whispered. She tried to kill her own child. Nia's expression was unreadable. That's what we need to confirm. But Mrs. Johnson, her tone shifted heavier. There's something else you should know. Your son's car accident, it might not have been an accident after all. The room tilted. Pastor David's hand tightened on my shoulder. What do you mean? I asked. The forensics team re-examined the vehicle after your statement, she said. We found evidence of tampering with the brake line. Someone sabotaged it. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the tile. Nia's voice softened. I'm sorry. I wish I had better news. But this changes everything. And just like that, the quiet morning shattered, and the thin line between grief and horror vanished. I was no longer just a witness to a tragedy. I was the mother of a murdered son, and the grandmother of the child his killer had tried to erase. I couldn't feel my hands. They were trembling too violently to obey me, as if my body no longer belonged to me. The detective's words echoed through my skull, bouncing off every fragile piece of sanity I still had left. Tampering with the brakes. Sabotaged. Not an accident. Marcus's death, my beautiful boy's death, hadn't been fate. It hadn't been chance, or God's mysterious plan. Someone had planned it. Someone had made sure he never came home that night. I stared at Detective Thompson, trying to understand what she was really saying. You're certain? My voice came out a whisper, almost pleading. She nodded. The original report listed mechanical failure caused by wear and tear, but our re-examination found tool marks on the brake line, deliberate incisions. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. My chest constricted. I could hear my pulse thundering in my ears. And you think? I couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, she said quietly. We believe Serena is involved. The room blurred. I felt Pastor David's hand steady me again, but even his warmth couldn't reach the cold that had settled deep in my bones. Serena, my daughter-in-law. The woman who had stood beside Marcus's coffin, her sobs shaking the church pew. The same woman who had called me mom for 3 years, who had accepted my family's love like a gift she never wanted but knew how to fake gratitude for. And now she had tried to kill her own child, the only piece of Marcus left in this world. Why? I whispered. Why would she do this? Nia sat down across from me, folding her hands. We're still putting the pieces together, but the timing, your son's death, the baby's birth, the attempt on his life, it's all connected. The DNA results confirm that the baby is Marcus's biological son. That means Serena was pregnant when he died. I felt the air leave my lungs. Pregnant. She'd been pregnant the night of the crash, and she hadn't told anyone. How far along was she when the accident happened? About 2 months, Nia said, based on the child's current age and the estimated conception date. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to steady the dizziness that rose like a tide. The images came uninvited. Serena standing in my kitchen, hands folded over her stomach, smiling that perfect, practiced smile. The night of the funeral, her tear-streaked face, her trembling voice saying, "He didn't deserve this." No, he didn't. And she knew it. Pastor David's voice was low beside me. "Evil often hides behind charm, Estelle. You know that." "Yes," I whispered. "But not this close to home," Nia continued. "We've issued a warrant for Serena's arrest, but so far we haven't been able to locate her. Her phone's off, her house is empty. She hasn't accessed her bank accounts since last week." "She's running," I said bitterly. "She knows you're closing in." "Probably, but she can't stay hidden forever." I wanted to believe that. But Serena was clever, too clever. I'd underestimated her once. I wouldn't do it again. The detective gathered her papers. "We'll keep you updated on the investigation. For now, the baby remains in protective care at the hospital. Child services will be involved soon." At the mention of child services, my stomach twisted. "What happens to him now?" "He'll be placed in state custody," she said carefully. "At least until we determine his mother's status." "State custody?" I repeated. The words tasted wrong. "You can't mean that. It's procedure, Mrs. Johnson." "I pulled him from that lake," I said, my voice trembling. "He was dying in my arms. You can't hand him over to strangers." Nia's tone softened. "I understand how you feel, but it's temporary. You can petition for custody once the investigation is complete." Petition, paperwork, bureaucracy. I thought of that baby's small hand clutching my finger, his weak breath against my skin. The system wouldn't love him. The system wouldn't remember that he had a father who died for love and a mother who'd tried to erase him. "He's my grandson," I said quietly. "My blood. I won't let him disappear into paperwork." Pastor David touched my shoulder again, his voice gentle but firm. "First, you need to breathe, Estelle. Then you need to fight, but wisely." Rhonda appeared at the doorway just then, her face pale but smiling faintly. "Mrs. Johnson," she said softly, "you can see him now." I didn't wait for permission. I stood and followed her down the corridor. The lights overhead hummed. Every footstep sounded too loud. My heart pounded as if it knew what waited for me on the other side of that door. The neonatal intensive care unit was a small room filled with the quiet rhythm of machines, the steady beep of monitors, the soft whoosh of oxygen, and there he was, the baby, my grandson. He looked impossibly small in the incubator, wrapped in blankets, a tiny mask covering his face. Tubes and wires ran from his arms, connecting him to the world that had nearly let him go. His chest rose and fell in delicate movements that made my eyes sting. Rhonda stood beside me, speaking softly. "He's stable for now. Still weak, but he's fighting. Babies are stronger than they look." I pressed my hand to the glass. The warmth of my palm fogged the surface. He had Marcus's nose, Marcus's mouth, even his hands tiny, but the same long fingers. "Can I touch him?" I asked. "Just one hand through the opening," Rhonda said gently. I reached in, my fingers trembling. The moment I brushed his skin, a shiver went through me. His hand twitched, so small and fragile, and then miraculously his fingers curled around mine. A sound escaped my throat, half sob, half prayer. "Hello, my love," I whispered. "You hold on for Grandma, you hear me? You keep fighting. I'm right here." Rhonda placed her hand on my shoulder. "He's lucky you found him." "No," I said softly, watching his tiny chest rise again. "I'm the lucky one. He's the reason I'm still breathing." For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself since Marcus's death, a purpose, a pulse that belonged to hope. But as I stood there, watching that small miracle fight for life, I also knew this peace wouldn't last, because somewhere out there Serena was still free, and I had no doubt she would come back. Not for redemption, but for what she believed was hers. I didn't move for a long time after Rhonda left. The room was quiet except for the soft whir of the machines that kept Elijah alive. Yes, Elijah. That was the name I whispered in my heart without daring to speak it aloud, the name Marcus had once told me he'd choose for his first son. Strong, steady, he'd said, laughing as he turned the pages of the family Bible, a name that means the Lord is my strength. I stood there now, watching that fragile body breathe through the tangle of tubes and wires, and wondered if Marcus was somewhere watching too, if his spirit lingered close, refusing to leave until his son was safe. The clock on the wall ticked quietly toward noon. I felt time, real and heavy, pressing on my shoulders. Every second that baby's chest rose and fell was borrowed time, each breath a small victory against the darkness that had tried to claim him. Rhonda came back with a nurse I hadn't seen before. "You need to eat something," she said gently, setting down a tray with soup and crackers. I nodded, though the smell of food turned my stomach. "The police will probably want to speak to you again later," she added carefully. "They'll want details about Serena, anything you remember." The mention of her name pulled me out of my trance. "Do they know where she is?" Rhonda hesitated. "They're still looking. Detective Thompson said they've checked her home and her office. She's gone. No trace." Of course she was. Serena had always been clever, one step ahead, wearing innocence like armor. She would have planned this every detail, every escape route. She'd fooled Marcus. She could fool the police. I pressed my hands together, staring through the glass at the child that was both hers and his. "She won't stop, Rhonda. I know her. She'll come back for him." Rhonda looked at me sadly. "Let the police worry about that. You need to rest." But I couldn't rest. My thoughts ran wild, connecting dots that I hadn't dared draw before. Serena pregnant. Serena silent. Marcus's sudden accident. And now, the baby my grandson found in a suitcase at the bottom of the lake. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. Calculated. She had wanted them both gone, Marcus first, then the child that tied her to him. A knock at the door startled me. Detective Thompson stepped in, her face drawn but focused. She carried another folder, thicker than the last. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, "I need to update you on the investigation." I turned fully toward her. "Have you found her?" "Not yet," she said, "but we found something else, something that may help you understand why." She opened the folder and spread photographs across the small table by the window. Bank statements, transaction records, copies of documents I didn't recognize. She pointed to one with her pen. 2 weeks after your son's death, Serena deposited $200,000 into her personal account, the payout from Marcus's life insurance. I felt the words like a slap. 200,000? Yes. It was issued automatically after the accident report was finalized. But here's the strange part. Nia slid another page forward. Within a month, the money was wired offshore to an account in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the paper, at the long strings of numbers I didn't understand. She was preparing to disappear. Exactly. But that's not all. We also found evidence that Marcus changed his will 2 weeks before his death. My eyes snapped to hers. Changed it? To what? Nia hesitated. He left everything not to Serena, but to his future children, to this baby. My knees buckled slightly and I reached for the back of the chair. The world seemed to tilt, the edges blurring. "He knew," I whispered. "He must have known she was pregnant. He tried to protect his child." The detective's voice was grim. "It seems that way." The pieces fell together with terrible clarity. Serena had realized the will excluded her. Marcus had taken away her claim to his money, his house, his company shares. To get what she wanted, she had to remove both him and the unborn child. "She killed him for money," I said. My voice sounded far away, not mine. And when she found out she couldn't have it all unless the baby was gone too, she tried to finish what she started. Nia didn't disagree. "We're building a case, Mrs. Johnson, but we still need her alive to confirm everything. Until we find her, you must be careful. If she believes the baby survived..." "She'll come for him," I finished. The detective nodded. "We'll assign an officer to the hospital, just as a precaution." When she left, I sank into the chair beside the incubator. The baby's tiny face was peaceful, unaware of the storm that surrounded him. I reached out again, slipping my hand through the small opening in the glass. His hand found mine, fingers curling instinctively around my finger. The warmth of that touch broke something inside me. "Your daddy died trying to protect you," I whispered. And I will do the same if I have to. I promise. Behind me, the rain started again, tapping gently on the window. I closed my eyes and imagined Marcus's voice, steady and calm. You always said love made us blind, Mom. Maybe it just makes us brave. I opened my eyes and looked at the sleeping child. Brave. Yes, I could be brave. For him. For Marcus. But even bravery has a price, and I could already feel the weight of what it would cost me pressing down on my soul. By the time the police left, the light outside had thinned to a pale gray. The rain had stopped, but the smell of it lingered: wet pavement, metal, and something faintly electric, as if the storm had only paused to catch its breath. I sat beside the incubator, my hand resting against the glass, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Each sound was proof that Elijah, yes, I had begun to call him that now, silently, possessively, was still fighting. But I knew what came next. I could feel it in the clipped way the nurses spoke, in the careful phrasing of Detective Thompson's words. Child Protective Services, temporary custody, state care, bureaucratic language wrapped around something raw and human. That evening, Rhonda appeared again, not with coffee this time, but with a stack of papers. Her face was gentle, her tone cautious. Mrs. Johnson, she said, Social Services needs to open an emergency case file for the baby. The word case made me flinch. He's not a case. He's a child. I know, she said softly. But they have procedures. Until his mother is located, the state has to take responsibility. I looked down at my hands, still raw from the lake water, the skin cracked along the knuckles. And what if the mother is the reason he nearly died? Rhonda hesitated, lowering her voice. That's why they'll place him in a safe foster home until everything is sorted out. It's temporary. Temporary. That word again. Everything about my life had become temporary since Marcus died. Temporary peace, temporary company, temporary meaning. Now they wanted to make my grandson temporary too. I can take him, I said. The words came out steadier than I felt. I'll care for him until the investigation is finished. Rhonda's eyes filled with sympathy. It's not that simple, Mrs. Johnson. Later that night, a young woman appeared in the waiting room, a stranger in a gray suit, a folder tucked under her arm. She introduced herself as Aline Mitchell from Child Protective Services. Her smile was professional, practiced, the kind people wear when they have bad news to deliver. Mrs. Johnson, she said, sitting down across from me, first I want to say how grateful we all are for what you did. You saved a life. That's extraordinary. I waited, because I knew what came after gratitude. Denial. However, she continued, given your age and the ongoing criminal investigation, you can't assume temporary custody at this time. My heart thudded painfully. Because I'm 62? Because we have to ensure the child's safety, she said, her tone clinical but not unkind. There will be evaluations, home visits, psychological screenings, background checks. I don't need an evaluation to prove I love him, I interrupted. He's my grandson, my son's blood. Aline folded her hands. I understand, but love isn't a legal qualification. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and tell her that laws were what had allowed Serena to walk free for months while my son's car rusted in an impound lot. But all I did was stare at the thin scar on the back of her hand and say quietly, I've lost enough family to red tape and delayed reports. I'm not losing him too. Her voice softened. If you truly want custody, there's a process. It won't be easy. Tell me. You'll need a background check, a psychological assessment, proof of income, medical clearance, and references from at least 3 non-family members. She looked at me with a flicker of pity. And you'll need to complete 40 hours of childcare training. I almost laughed. I raised a son to adulthood. I know, she said, but the system doesn't. She left me with a packet of forms, all stamped and numbered, every page another wall between me and the boy who had already stolen my heart. When she was gone, I walked back to the NICU. Rhonda was there, rocking gently on her heels as she watched the baby sleep. They're taking him, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. For now, she said. Not forever. I leaned against the glass. When Marcus was little, he had a fever once, 104 degrees. I sat up all night holding him because the doctor said he might seize if it got higher. I remember how he burned in my arms, how every minute felt like a prayer. This feels the same, Rhonda, like I'm waiting for someone to tell me whether my heart keeps beating or not. She looked at me for a long moment, then placed her hand over mine. Then don't give up, fight for him. The next morning, I started. I filled out the forms. I made appointments. I called Pastor David and asked if he would write a character reference. Of course, he said. You're one of the strongest women I know. I called the hospital to request copies of the DNA results, proving the child was Marcus's. I made a list of everything my house would need: a crib, locks for the cabinets, a safety rail for the stairs. I hadn't cared about my home for months, but suddenly every inch of it mattered. At night, I sat beside Elijah's incubator, whispering to him about the future I intended to build. You'll come home soon, I said softly. I'll tell you about your daddy, about the house he grew up in, about the way he used to chase fireflies in the backyard until the sun went down. I'll make you his favorite soup, chicken, and dumplings. I'll keep you safe. And though he couldn't understand, his little hand always seemed to twitch when I spoke, as if he could feel the promise hanging in the air between us. But even as hope began to bloom, I knew danger hadn't passed. Detective Thompson came by on the fourth evening, exhaustion etched into her face. We still haven't found Serena, she said. She's off the grid completely. Then she's planning something, I said. You don't disappear unless you're running toward something. Maybe, Nia said. Or maybe she's running from you. That night, as I drove home for the first time in nearly a week, I noticed something strange. A car, a dark sedan, parked 2 houses down from mine, engine idling, headlights off. I slowed as I turned into my driveway, trying not to look directly at it. The car didn't move. I sat there for a full minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel, every instinct screaming that I was being watched. Finally, the sedan pulled away, disappearing into the darkness. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was tired, imagining things. But deep down, I knew better. Serena wasn't done. Not yet. And as I sat in my quiet kitchen, the forms spread out on the table, I realized something chilling. I was no longer just fighting the system. I was fighting a ghost with my daughter-in-law's face and my son's blood on her hands. The next few days felt like living in 2 separate worlds, one ruled by paperwork and another shadowed by fear. By day, I dealt with forms, background checks, medical evaluations, and endless phone calls from people who spoke in rehearsed sympathy but moved with bureaucratic slowness. By night, I sat awake, convinced that every creak outside my window might be her, Serena, watching, waiting. Detective Thompson called me every morning. Sometimes she had news, sometimes she didn't. We're following leads, she'd say, her voice calm but tired. Don't lose faith. Faith. That word used to mean something to me. Now it sounded like a promise no one intended to keep. Rhonda helped me whenever she could, guiding me through the forms, explaining what the social worker really meant in all her polite phrasing. She'd stop by the hospital nursery on her breaks to check on Elijah, sending me updates when I wasn't allowed in. He opened his eyes for a few seconds, she told me one morning. He has Marcus's eyes, Estelle. You'll see soon. That image kept me going, Marcus's eyes looking back at me from a crib instead of a coffin. On the 6th day, Detective Thompson showed up at my door. It was early, the sky still streaked with pink. She looked as though she hadn't slept in 2 nights. May I come in? She asked. I led her to the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air. It was the only thing I could stomach lately. She sat at the table, spread a folder open, and pushed several photographs toward me. These were taken from Serena's bank records, she said. She transferred $200,000, the life insurance payout, to an offshore account just 2 weeks after Marcus's death. We also found she liquidated all her personal savings around the same time. I stared at the pages. She was preparing to disappear. Exactly. But it's more complicated than that, Nia said, pulling out another document. Marcus changed his will 2 weeks before the accident. He left everything to his future children, not to Serena. My breath caught. He knew. Yes, and that means Serena knew too. I closed my eyes, my pulse pounding in my ears. Marcus had always been responsible, too responsible sometimes. If he'd changed his will, it meant he'd suspected something. Maybe he'd sensed danger but couldn't face what it meant. She killed him, I whispered. She killed him to get the money. And when she realized the baby was standing in her way, she tried to get rid of him too. Nia nodded grimly. We think so, but we still need proof. and we need Serena alive to confirm it." "She's alive," I said bitterly. "I can feel it. I felt her eyes on me." Nia's expression tightened. "We can't confirm that, but we're not ruling anything out. If you see anything strange, cars following you, lights outside your home, call me immediately. Do not confront her." After she left, I sat at the table staring at Marcus's photograph. He was smiling, his arm around Serena, the picture taken on their honeymoon. The way she looked at him, it had fooled everyone, even me. Love can be the cruelest disguise. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind pushed through the trees outside, scraping the branches against my windows like fingers. At 2 a.m., I gave up on rest and went to Marcus's study. His things were still where he'd left them, papers stacked neatly, his college diploma hanging crooked on the wall, the faint smell of his cologne clinging to the air. I ran my hand along the desk and felt something catch beneath my fingers, a loose panel under the drawer. I pulled it open, revealing a small brown notebook, the leather worn soft by time. Marcus's handwriting covered the first page. I turned on the lamp and began to read. October 4th, I found out Serena's pregnant. She didn't want me to know. She's angry, says a baby will ruin everything. I don't understand. I thought she'd be happy. My heart clenched. I read on. October 8th. She's been acting strange. Checking my bank statements, asking questions about the life insurance. I told her not to worry, that we'd be fine, but she just walked away. October 10th, I changed my will today. Everything goes to the baby. I told Mom once that love makes us foolish, but maybe this time it'll make me smart. I won't let anyone hurt my child. I stopped. My hands were shaking. The date of the last entry was October 13th, the night before he died. She said I'll regret crossing her. I don't know what she meant, but if something happens to me, someone needs to look at the brakes. The notebook slipped from my hands and fell to the floor. He knew. He had known all along. The next morning, I was back in the police station, the journal clutched in my trembling hands. Detective Thompson read each page slowly, her jaw tightening. "This changes everything," she said finally. "It's premeditation, proof of motive." "So, you'll find her now?" I demanded. "You'll stop her before she disappears for good?" "We're trying, Mrs. Johnson. We traced the offshore account to a shell company registered under a false name. We think she's still in the country, moving money through intermediaries." I wanted to scream. It wasn't enough. None of it was enough. Marcus was gone, and the only justice left was the frail heartbeat of a child who might never know his father's name. Before I left, Nia placed her hand on my arm. "We'll catch her," she said quietly. "But until we do, stay close to people you trust, and don't let the baby out of your sight." When I returned to the hospital, Rhonda met me with a smile that barely hid her fatigue. "He's stronger today," she said. "They removed one of the tubes. He even cried a little when they changed his blanket." I went to him at once, my heart swelling with something fierce and protective. His eyes fluttered open for the first time, dark and deep, the same eyes that once looked up at me from a crib 30 years ago. "Hello, Elijah," I whispered. "Welcome back." His tiny fist closed around my finger. I felt something surge through me, a strange mix of grief and gratitude, of love and vengeance. Marcus had left this world, but he'd left behind proof of everything Serena had tried to destroy. And now, that proof was breathing. When I left the precinct that evening, the sky had turned the color of iron. The air smelled of rain again, though the clouds refused to break. I clutched Marcus's journal against my chest like a fragile heartbeat, afraid to let it out of my sight. Every word inside was a confession he hadn't been able to say aloud, a whisper from the grave warning me too late. At home, I sat at the kitchen table and read it again, slower this time, forcing myself to absorb every syllable. His handwriting, steady, precise, grew unsteady toward the end, as though he'd been rushing, desperate to get it all out before someone stopped him. She said I'd regret crossing her. I don't know what she meant. But if something happens to me, someone needs to look at the brakes. That line carved itself into me like a scar. I could almost hear his voice, weary but resolute, the way he used to sound when he was trying to protect me from something. He had known. He had tried to warn me. And now his warning was all I had left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Marcus's old study, the journal open beside a photograph of him at his college graduation, his smile full of possibility, Serena's hand looped through his arm. I had loved that picture once. Now it felt like a lie. At dawn, I called Detective Thompson. I found something, I said. When she arrived an hour later, she didn't waste time with small talk. I handed her the notebook and watched her face as she turned the pages. Her expression hardened with each entry. "This is powerful evidence," she said. "It proves motive, intent, and foreknowledge. With this, we can officially reopen Marcus's case as a homicide." I exhaled a shaky breath. "Then you can finally arrest her." She nodded. "We already have a warrant. Now we just have to find her." Nia stood by the window, staring out at the rain. "She's smart," she said softly. "Too smart to leave a trail. But people like Serena can't help themselves. They always come back for what they think belongs to them." Her gaze shifted toward me. "And right now, that's the baby." A chill went through me. "You think she'll try again?" "I think she's watching," Nia said, "waiting for an opening." When she left, I locked every door and checked the windows twice. Then I drove to the hospital. Rhonda met me at the NICU doors, her face brightening the moment she saw me. "He's getting stronger," she said. "He's breathing on his own now." I followed her into the room, and there he was, smaller than my forearm, but alive, awake, his dark eyes blinking curiously at the world. For the first time, there were no tubes, no mask, only a soft blanket and the faint scent of milk and soap. "Can I hold him?" I asked. My voice broke on the last word. "Of course," Rhonda said. She lifted him gently and placed him in my arms. He fit against my chest as if he had been meant to be there all along. His warmth soaked into me, thawing something I hadn't realized had frozen solid. "Hello, Elijah," I whispered. Saying his name aloud for the first time felt like claiming him, like rewriting the cruel script fate had handed us. "You're safe now, my darling. I promise you, no one will ever hurt you again." Rhonda smiled. "That's a strong name." "It was Marcus's choice," I said. "He told me once that if he ever had a son, he'd call him Elijah, said it meant strength and truth. Maybe he knew he'd need both." I rocked him gently until his eyelids fluttered shut. The rhythmic rise and fall of his chest steadied my own breathing. For a few precious minutes, the world outside the hospital walls didn't exist. There was no Serena, no investigation, no fear, just this tiny heartbeat against mine, echoing the memory of the boy I had lost. When Rhonda came back, she placed a hand on my shoulder. "He'll be moved out of the ICU tomorrow. After that, social services will take over." The words hit me like cold water. "Take over?" "They'll need to place him temporarily in foster care until the custody hearing." I wanted to protest, to scream that he belonged with me, but the nurse's gentle eyes silenced me. She wasn't the enemy. The system was. That evening, Aline, the social worker, came again. This time, her tone was softer, almost apologetic. "I read your file, Mrs. Johnson," she said, sitting beside me in the waiting area. "You're making progress. The background check came back clean. The home inspection is scheduled for next week." "And until then?" I asked. "Elijah will be placed with a certified foster family. You'll be allowed supervised visits twice a week." "Supervised," I repeated bitterly. "Like I'm some kind of danger." She sighed. "It's the law. You're doing everything right. Just don't give up." After she left, I returned to Elijah's crib one last time. I touched his tiny hand through the bars, my heart aching with both love and rage. "I won't let them take you," I whispered. "Not the system, not her, not anyone. You belong with me. You always have." That night, as I drove home through the fog, I kept checking my rearview mirror. At first, it was just a habit, a nervous glance every few blocks. But then I saw it, the same dark sedan from before, 2 headlights burning low, keeping its distance. I turned left. So did it. I slowed down. It slowed too. My throat tightened. I could almost feel eyes boring into the back of my neck. At the next intersection, I pulled into a gas station and parked beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The sedan rolled past, slow, deliberate. I caught a glimpse of the driver, a flash of pale hair under the streetlight, a familiar silhouette. My blood ran cold. "Serena." I sat frozen until the car disappeared into the fog. Then I reached for my phone with shaking hands and dialed Nia's number. "She's here," I whispered when the detective answered. "She's watching me." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Nia said, "Don't go home. Go straight to the police station. We'll send a car." I looked out into the darkness again, but the road was empty now, the night too quiet. Still, I knew what I had seen. She was out there. And she wasn't done yet. The drive to the police station that night felt endless. Every turn of the wheel, every flash of headlights behind me, made my heart skip. The fog thickened, swallowing the road whole until all I could see were the faint white lines stretching ahead like veins under skin. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, expecting those same headlights to reappear, but the road stayed empty. When I finally pulled into the precinct parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. Detective Thompson was waiting just inside the lobby, her coat thrown over one shoulder, her expression tight but calm. "You did the right thing calling," she said. "Did you get a good look at the driver?" "Not much," I admitted. "But the hair, it was blonde now, shorter. Still, I'd know her anywhere." Nia nodded slowly. "Changing her appearance would make sense. We'll circulate an updated description." They took my statement again every street I'd turned, every movement of that car. It was well past midnight when they finally told me to go home, promising extra patrols around my neighborhood. I didn't believe for a second that would stop Serena if she truly wanted to find me. I couldn't sleep when I got back. I double-locked the doors, checked the windows twice, and still couldn't shake the feeling of eyes in the dark. Every creak in the house made me jump. I sat in the living room chair until dawn, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of Marcus's aftershave, waiting for morning to come. 2 days passed. No more sightings. The police promised they were closing in, but the tone of their voices told me otherwise. They were chasing a ghost. Then, on the third night, my phone rang. It was just after 11. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the hallway clock. I almost didn't answer. It was an unknown number, but something in my gut told me I had to. "Hello?" For a moment, there was nothing, just breathing, slow, deliberate. Then a voice I hadn't heard in months, cold, calm, and unmistakably hers. "Estée." The sound of my name in her mouth made my blood run cold. "Serena." "So you have been thinking about me," she said. Her tone was light, almost amused. "I hear you've been busy playing Grandmother of the Year." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "I think you already know." I forced myself to breathe. "The police are looking for you." "I know," she said casually. "They've been looking for a while, haven't they? But you're the one I wanted to talk to. You and I have unfinished business." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break free from my chest. "What kind of business?" "The kind that involves my son and the money that rightfully belongs to him." I almost laughed. "Your son? You tried to drown him." Her voice hardened instantly. "Don't start acting holy, Estelle. You've never liked me. You think you're the saint in this story, but you're not. You never forgave me for not being good enough for Marcus. You wanted him to marry some dull little church girl who'd keep her mouth shut. But he chose me. He loved me." "Loved," I said. "Past tense, because you killed him." Silence. Then a low, humorless chuckle. "You're very dramatic for someone who knows so little. You think Marcus was a perfect husband, don't you? Sweet, loyal, honest." "Don't you, Dari?" "He wasn't," she said, cutting me off. "He wasn't the man you think he was. You'll see soon enough." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. "What are you talking about?" But she ignored the question. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring the baby to me, along with the documents about Marcus's estate. The will, the insurance papers, everything. Tomorrow night, midnight, the warehouse by the lake. You remember it, don't you? Where you and Marcus used to fish." My mouth went dry. "And if I don't?" Her voice dropped, quiet and sharp as a knife. "Then I'll come for him myself. And you won't like what happens when I do." The line went dead. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the phone in my hand. My knees felt weak, my breath shallow. I played her words over in my mind, one after another, until they tangled together like barbed wire. Then instinct took over. I called Detective Thompson. She answered on the second ring. "She called me," I said, my voice trembling. "She wants me to meet her at the warehouse tomorrow, midnight. She said she wants the baby and the money." "Good," Nia said immediately. "That's exactly what we need. This is our chance." "Chance for what?" "To catch her," Nia replied. "We'll set a trap. You'll meet her, but you won't be alone. We'll have officers positioned around the warehouse. The moment she shows up, we'll move in." My stomach nodded. "You want me to go there?" "It's the only way," she said. "She trusts you. That's our advantage." I hesitated. Every instinct in me screamed no. But then I thought of Marcus's journal, of Elijah's small hand curling around my finger. If this was the only way to end it, to make sure he'd never grow up under her shadow, I had to do it. "All right," I said finally. "Tell me what you need me to do." The next day moved in slow motion. The detectives set up their plan. Microphones, hidden transmitters, snipers positioned on the roofs of nearby buildings. They fitted me with a tiny microphone, disguised as a button on my blouse, and taught me how to trigger the panic signal if things went wrong. "You won't be alone," Nia promised. "We'll be less than 50 feet away at all times. You just keep her talking. Try to get her to admit what she did." I nodded, though fear had already coiled tight in my stomach. When the sun finally set, I drove to the lake one last time to see where it would end. The water was still, black and silent under the moon. Somewhere beneath it, echoes of that day still lingered: the shattered cup, the splash of the suitcase, the first fragile breath of a child who refused to die. I touched the scar on my palm from that day, the faint white line where the suitcase handle had cut into my skin. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the lake, "this ends." Then I turned and drove home, unaware that Serena's words would prove truer than I ever wanted them to. The next day stretched on like an endless thread pulled too tight. Every hour felt heavier than the one before. The police spent the afternoon turning my living room into a command post: wires, radios, maps, and headsets covering my dining table. Detective Thompson briefed me again and again until I could recite the plan in my sleep. "Stay calm. Keep her talking," she said for the third time, her voice steady but urgent. "We'll have snipers on the roofs across the street, 2 assault teams behind the side and rear entrances. You'll enter through the main door at midnight. Do not move closer than 10 feet unless we tell you. The button on your blouse is the transmitter. Press it 3 times fast if you're in danger. We'll come in immediately." I nodded, though the words barely registered. My thoughts kept circling back to one thing. I was walking straight into the dark to face the woman who had murdered my son. Rhonda came by before I left. She brought Elijah with her sleeping, his tiny fists curled against his chest. "He'll stay with me tonight," she said softly. "Somewhere safe. You focus on finishing this." I brushed my fingers over his cheek. His warmth grounded me, kept me from unraveling completely. "Tell him Grandma loves him," I whispered, "and that I'll be back soon." The detectives watched as Rhonda carried him away. For a moment I felt the same ache I'd felt at Marcus's funeral, the hollow, unfixable kind that sits right behind your ribs. Then I forced myself to stand. It was time. By 11 p.m., I was sitting in my car outside the abandoned warehouse by Lake Crestwood. The night was windless, the lake flat and black as obsidian. I could see the faint reflection of the moon trembling on the surface, the same water that had once swallowed that suitcase whole. "Estelle?" Naya's voice crackled in my earpiece, low and calm. "We're in position. You're clear to move when ready." I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of damp metal and old wood. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, too loud in the silence. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that Serena wouldn't come here without a plan of her own. But I kept walking. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted doors gaping slightly open. Inside, darkness pooled thick and deep. I took one last breath and stepped inside. The door creaked behind me. My heart hammered. "Serena?" I called. My voice echoed back, thin and small. "Close the door," a voice answered from the shadows. I froze. I knew that voice, smooth, cold, almost melodic. The kind of voice that smiled even when its words didn't. "Do it," she said again. My hand shook as I pushed the door shut. Moonlight spilled through the broken windows in narrow silver bars, slicing across the dusty floor. And then I saw her. Serena stood near the center of the room, half illuminated by the fractured light. Her hair was shorter now, bleached pale, and she wore a black sweatshirt that hung loose around her thin frame. But even changed, I knew her, the sharp line of her jaw, the restless way she moved her hands. "You came," she said, almost amused. "I wasn't sure you'd have the courage. You said you wanted to talk." My voice surprised me. It sounded steady, colder than I felt. "Where's the money?" "Forget the money," I said. "You killed my son." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something almost like annoyance, not guilt. He left me no choice. No choice? I took a step closer. You cut the brakes on his car. I did what I had to, she snapped, her composure cracking. He was going to ruin everything. He changed his will. He left everything to that child, to a future that didn't even exist yet. So you murdered him, I said, my voice trembling. And then you tried to drown your own baby. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. You make it sound so dramatic. I didn't try to drown him. I did what was necessary. You think you know love, Estelle, but you don't. Love is survival, and I survived. You're sick. No, she said, her voice softening dangerously. I'm free. But you, she tilted her head, studying me. You're a ghost. You've been dead since the day Marcus died. You just don't realize it yet. Something glinted in her hand. A small black pistol. The air froze. Where's my son? She asked quietly. I forced my voice to stay calm. He's safe. Bring him to me. No. Her smile faded. Last chance. I pressed the panic button once. Twice. 3 times. Her finger twitched on the trigger. The gun went off with a deafening crack. The bullet hit my shoulder, a sharp, blinding pain that sent me sprawling backward. I hit the concrete hard, gasping as warmth spread down my arm. My ears rang. Estelle, Nia's voice shouted in my earpiece. We're coming in, hold on. Serena spun toward the sound, realizing too late what had happened. The warehouse doors exploded open. Flashlights cut through the dark. Police! Drop the weapon! She turned back to me, eyes wild. For a moment, I thought she might shoot again. Instead, she froze. The gun slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. Then she smiled, strangely calm, as officers swarmed around her. You can't save him from me, she whispered as they dragged her down. We're bound, you and I. That boy carries my blood. The world tilted, lights flashing, voices shouting. I felt hands on me, Nia's voice, firm and close. Stay with me, Estelle. The ambulance is on its way. You're going to be okay. I'm fine, I managed to say through gritted teeth. Just tell me, did you get her? We got her, Nia said, her voice trembling with relief. It's over. As the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, I looked once more toward the lake through the warehouse's broken window. The water shimmered under the moonlight, calm again, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Because evil never really disappears, it just sinks deep enough to wait for another day. When I woke, the first thing I heard was the soft rhythm of a heart monitor, steady, patient, alive. The second thing was a voice, warm and trembling, humming a lullaby I hadn't heard in decades. Rhonda? My voice came out cracked, dry as paper. She turned toward me, relief flooding her tired eyes. Look who's awake, she whispered. She was sitting by my bedside, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair pinned back hastily. In her arms, wrapped in a pale blue blanket, was Elijah. He was sleeping soundly, his tiny mouth open, one hand curled around the edge of her shirt. My chest ached not from the bandages that wrapped my shoulder, but from something deeper, something that felt dangerously like joy. Is he all right? I asked. He's perfect, Rhonda said softly. He's been waiting for you. She placed him in my good arm, careful not to brush the IV line. The weight of him, the warmth that was enough to make me forget the pain for a moment. I could feel his breath against my skin, light as the flutter of a bird's wing. He smells like soap, I said, smiling faintly. Not the lake anymore. Rhonda chuckled, brushing my hair back from my forehead. He's a different baby now. Strong, hungry, loud. The door opened quietly, and Detective Nia Thompson stepped inside. She looked exhausted, but for the first time since I'd met her, there was something softer in her expression, relief, maybe even admiration. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I've been shot, I said dryly. Nia actually smiled. Fair, but you're lucky. The bullet missed every vital artery by less than an inch. The doctor said if it had been any closer. She stopped herself. Well, it wasn't. And Serena? I asked, tightening my hold on Elijah. Under arrest, Nia said. First-degree murder for Marcus. Attempted murder for Elijah. Attempted murder for you. Fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, the list goes on. She's not going anywhere for the rest of her life. I closed my eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. The words felt surreal, heavy, and light all at once. The rest of her life. The recording worked perfectly, Nia continued. She confessed to everything. Her lawyer tried to argue coercion, but the jury didn't buy it. 30 minutes of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Trial's over already? I asked, blinking in confusion. You've been asleep for 3 days, she said gently. They waited to tell you until you woke. 3 days. I'd lost 3 whole days of this new life. 3 days of Elijah's breaths and cries and tiny victories. Nia pulled a chair closer and sat beside my bed. You're a brave woman, Mrs. Johnson. Most people wouldn't have walked into that warehouse. You not only helped us close 2 investigations, you saved a child's life and brought justice for your son. I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow, like someone who had walked too far into the storm and barely crawled out alive. Justice doesn't bring him back, I whispered. No, Nia said quietly. But it makes sure she can never hurt anyone again. She stood, setting the flowers on the small table beside me. Get some rest. You've done enough for now. After she left, Rhonda sat in the same chair Nia had vacated. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, painting lines of gold across Elijah's face. He stirred, stretching his tiny fingers. What happens now? I asked softly. You heal, she said, and then you go home. You have a hearing next week, the custody one. I looked down at the baby in my arms, his little mouth puckered, his eyelids fluttering as if dreaming. I don't need custody, I murmured. I just need him safe. Rhonda smiled. Then I think you're about to get both. The days that followed blurred into one long rhythm of recovery. Physical therapy for my shoulder, endless hospital meals, polite nurses checking vitals. But through it all, Elijah was there breathing, growing stronger, reminding me that life was stubborn, that hope could bloom even after the ugliest winters. Pastor David visited every evening, his Bible tucked under his arm. He never preached. He just sat with us, sometimes humming hymns under his breath. One evening, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses and said, You fought the devil himself and lived. That's not luck, Estelle. That's purpose. Maybe he was right. When I was finally discharged, the doctor shook my hand and said, You're healing beautifully. 2 more weeks, and you'll have full use of that arm again. Rhonda was waiting in the lobby with Elijah bundled against her shoulder. He's all yours, Grandma, she said with a grin, at least for today. I kissed his forehead, inhaling the soft, powdery scent of him. Outside, the world looked brighter than I remembered. The air was warm, the sky impossibly blue. Nia met us at the exit, her coat fluttering in the wind. I thought you might want to know, she said. The sentencing hearing was this morning. Life without parole. Good, I said quietly. I hope she lives long enough to remember every detail. She will, Nia said. People like Serena never forget. As I strapped Elijah into the car seat, my arm still weak from the bandages, I felt the faint tug of something unfamiliar. Peace. Not perfect, not whole, but enough to breathe again. The drive home was slow. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other reaching back toward the car seat, feeling for him. He slept most of the way, his tiny breaths like whispers against the hum of the tires. When we reached the house, I carried him inside. The late afternoon sun fell across the living room, touching Marcus's photo on the mantel. I paused, staring at my son's smiling face. We did it, I whispered. She's gone. He's safe. You can rest now. The photo stayed silent, but the light seemed to grow a little warmer, as if Marcus had heard. Elijah stirred in my arms and opened his eyes. Marcus's eyes, dark and kind and curious. He blinked up at me, and I felt something deep inside me settle finally into stillness. We were safe. For now. But peace, I knew, wasn't the end of the story. It was the fragile pause before life began again. The courthouse smelled of old paper, coffee, and nerves. It was the kind of building that had seen too many tears, too many pleas, too many people waiting for strangers to decide the rest of their lives. I sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom 4B, my shoulder still aching when I moved too quickly. Elijah was in Rhonda's arms beside me, sleeping against her chest. He had grown in those few short weeks, his cheeks fuller, his breath steadier. Pastor David sat across from us, his Bible closed but his hand resting on top of it as if to keep it steady. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "you remember truth has already been spoken. Now it only needs to be heard." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to reply. The bailiff opened the door, calling my name. "Mrs. Estelle Johnson, for custody petition number 2218. Inside, the courtroom was cold and bright. Everything looked too clean, too deliberate, like the world was pretending justice was a neat and polished thing. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a gaze sharp enough to slice through pretense, sat behind her bench, flipping through my file. "Mrs. Johnson," she began, her tone firm but not unkind. "I've reviewed your petition and the accompanying reports. I understand you've been through extraordinary circumstances." "That's one way to describe it," I murmured, earning a faint smile from her. Across the room, Aline Mitchell from Child Protective Services stood at her table, her gray suit immaculate, her stack of papers neat and square. But this time her expression wasn't distant professionalism, it was quiet support. She caught my eye and nodded once. The judge continued, "We've received testimony from Detective Nia Thompson, Nurse Rhonda Banks, and Pastor David Price on your behalf. We've also reviewed psychological assessments and home inspections, all of which indicate you can provide a stable, loving environment for the child known as Baby Boy Johnson." "His name is Elijah," I said softly. The judge looked up. "Elijah." She smiled slightly. "A good name, fitting." Rhonda shifted beside me, bouncing the baby gently when he started to stir. His small cry echoed faintly through the room, one tiny, fragile sound that silenced everything else. The judge glanced toward him, her expression softening. Then her tone turned formal again. "Before I render a decision, Mrs. Johnson, is there anything you wish to say for the record?" I stood slowly, my shoulders stiff, my knees shaking. I hadn't prepared a speech. I had spent days trying to write one, but the words never sounded right on paper. So I spoke from the place in me that had carried this entire story, the place that had buried a son and pulled a grandson from a lake. "Your Honor," I began, "I'm not here to prove I'm perfect. I'm here because I can't bear to see another child lose everything the way I did. My son Marcus was a good man. He worked hard, he loved deeply, and he died because someone else couldn't stand to let him live free. That same person tried to erase the last piece of him left in this world, this baby. But he fought. He survived. And I can't let him grow up without knowing who he comes from." I paused, swallowing hard. I don't have wealth or youth or a spotless home, but I have time and patience and love. I have everything that matters. Marcus used to tell me that love isn't about what we lose, it's about what we keep safe. That's what I want to do for Elijah, keep him safe. The judge watched me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she leaned back in her chair, folded her hands and said quietly, "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson." The silence that followed was thick and fragile. I could hear the distant hum of the ceiling fan, the faint shuffle of papers. Finally, the judge spoke. "This court finds that the petitioner, Mrs. Estelle Johnson, has demonstrated the emotional and physical capacity to care for the minor child known as Elijah Marcus Johnson. Effective immediately, legal and permanent custody is hereby granted." The sound of the gavel was small, almost gentle, but it might as well have been thunder. My knees gave out and I sank back into my chair, a sob breaking free before I could stop it. Rhonda pressed the baby into my arms, and Pastor David's hand found my shoulder. "It's done," Rhonda whispered. "He's yours." I looked down at Elijah, his face soft, his eyes blinking open at the sound of my heartbeat. "We did it, my love," I whispered. "You're coming home." As we left the courtroom, Aline caught my arm. "You were extraordinary in there," she said. "Not many people could have gone through what you did and still speak with that much grace." "I didn't have a choice," I said simply. "He's my family." She smiled. "I know, and now it's official." Outside, the autumn air was cool and bright, the first hints of winter threading through the wind. The trees around the courthouse had turned gold, their leaves falling like confetti across the steps. I stepped out into the sunlight, holding Elijah close, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight of fear lift. Nia was waiting near her car. "Congratulations," she said, genuine warmth in her voice. "You did it." "No," I said, smiling faintly. "We did it." She reached into her coat pocket and handed me something, a small silver locket. "We found this in Serena's things," she said. "It was Marcus's. I thought you should have it." I turned it over in my palm. Inside was a picture Marcus holding Serena on their wedding day, both of them smiling, the world still whole. I traced his face with my thumb. "Thank you," I whispered. "Take care of yourself, Estelle," Nia said. "And take care of him." As she drove away, I stood there for a long moment, watching the sunlight catch on the courthouse windows. Elijah stirred in my arms, a soft coo escaping his lips. The sound filled the empty spaces in me that grief had hollowed out. When I finally walked toward the car, Rhonda and Pastor David fell into step beside me. "Home?" Rhonda asked. "Home," I said, "where he belongs." We drove slowly, the golden leaves swirling around us like blessings. For once, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't expect danger hiding in the distance. Because for the first time since that awful day by the lake, the road ahead felt clear. 5 years have passed since that night by the lake, and yet sometimes, when the house goes quiet and the wind slips through the trees just right, I still hear it, the splash of that suitcase breaking the water, the echo of my own scream. The past has a strange way of staying alive, whispering through the walls long after you think you've silenced it. Elijah is 6 now. He runs through this old house like a storm, all laughter and noise and light. He leaves toy trucks under my kitchen table and muddy footprints on the porch I once scrubbed until my knees gave out. He's tall for his age, all legs and curiosity, with Marcus's dark eyes and his smile, the kind that starts small and takes over his whole face. He calls me Grandma, though sometimes he says Mama Estelle, the way he used to when he was learning to talk. I never correct him. Some words are too precious to fix. The house feels alive again. The garden I once let die now overflows with wildflowers. The lake, that terrible lake, lies just beyond the trees, calm and glassy in the morning light. I go there sometimes, not to mourn, but to remember. I bring Elijah with me. He skips stones across the water, his laughter chasing the ripples. I never tell him what that place once took from us. He'll learn the truth one day, but not yet. For now, he deserves only peace. Detective Thompson still visits every Christmas. She brings a small gift for Elijah, a model police car, a set of puzzles, a book about bravery. She never stays long. The job keeps her busy. But each time she leaves, she squeezes my hand and says, "You did good, Estelle." And each time I tell her, "So did you." Rhonda retired last year. We still talk every week. She says she misses the hospital noise but not the paperwork. Pastor David still stops by on Sundays, though his steps have slowed. He says Elijah reminds him of the boy who once sat in the front pew, swinging his legs, trying to sneak peppermints before the sermon. Sometimes I catch myself talking to Marcus out loud when I'm alone. He's doing fine, I tell him. He eats too many cookies and he hates bedtime, but he's kind. You'd be proud. And then I imagine Marcus's voice, soft and sure. "You did what I couldn't, Mom. You kept him safe." I wish I could say that Serena is gone from my thoughts. She's not. I hear her name sometimes on the news, appeals denied, psychiatric evaluations reviewed. She sits in a gray cell somewhere upstate, living in the silence she tried to give me. The papers call her the Lake Widow. The world has turned her into a story. I suppose we all become stories in the end. But I don't hate her anymore. Hatred is a weight I can't carry forever. I used to think forgiveness meant saying what she did was excusable. It's not. It never will be. Forgiveness, I've learned, is simply deciding not to let the darkness follow you home. Last week, Elijah came home from school with a drawing me, holding his hand by the lake. Above us, he'd drawn a man in the sky, smiling. "That's Daddy," he said proudly. "He watches us when we go to the water." I couldn't speak for a moment. All I could do was nod and trace the crayon lines with my fingers. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "He watches. Always." Tonight, as I write this, Elijah is asleep in the next room, his soft snores breaking the silence that used to crush me. The house smells of warm milk and cedar. A storm is rolling in, and the first drops of rain are tapping against the windows like an old lullaby. I walked down to the lake earlier, just before sunset. The water was still, the air sweet with pine and earth. I watched the surface shift as a single leaf fell, sending out small ripples that disappeared before they reached the shore. That's what life feels like now, stillness, interrupted by memory, then stillness again. Sometimes I wonder if peace is really possible after everything, or if it's just another word for acceptance. I don't know. I only know that love, even broken and battered, is still the only thing worth carrying forward. I turned to go, but just before I left, I whispered into the wind, "Thank you. For Marcus. For Elia. For the chance to live again. And maybe, just maybe, for the strength to forgive the woman who tried to steal it all away." I don't know what tomorrow will bring. None of us do. But if you're listening, if you've walked through your own darkness and wonder whether light ever returns, believe me, it does. Sometimes, it arrives in the shape of a small hand curling around your finger, whispering that even after everything you've lost, love can still find you. So I'll ask you what I ask myself. Whenever the night feels heavy, would you have done the same? Because I did. And I'd do it again.